Slowly but surely, hooray, coming to the end of Isaiah. I'm going to cover Isaiah 62 and 63 today, but we're going to start with Psalm 48. Oh, Sarah, you just took a bite of your. Would you read it for us, please?
Sure,
Catherine?
Psalm 48.
I don't have them. I didn't bring a Bible. I just have Golden Gate to read.
Okay.
All right, Psalm 48.
It says, hold on, it says the theme here is that God's presence is our joy, security, and salvation. God is praised as the defender of Jerusalem, the holy city of the Jews. He is also our defender and guide forever. And they believe that the author was the temple assistants, but kind of keep that in mind because we're going to talk about the temple watchman
Okay.
as we read today.
Yeah, so this one titles it The Glory and Strength of Zion, a psalm of the Korahites. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of God. His holy mountain, beautiful in elevation, is the joy of all the earth. Mount Zion in the far north, the city of the great king. Within its citadels, God has shown himself a sure defense. Then the kings assembled, they came on together. As soon as they saw it, they were astounded. They were in panic, they took to flight. Trembling took hold of them there, pains as a woman in labor, as when an east wind shatters the ships of Tarshish. As we have heard, as we have seen in the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God, which God establishes forever. We ponder your steadfast love, O God, in the midst of your temple. Your name, O God, like your praise, reaches to the ends of the earth. Your right hand is filled with victory. Let Mount Zion be glad, let the towns of Judah rejoice because of your judgments. Walk about Zion, go all around it, count its towers, consider well its ramparts, go through its citadels, that you may tell the next generation that this is God, our God forever and ever. He will be our guide forever.
Okay. So we're finally, as I thought, Catherine did a great job explaining the last parts of Isaiah and the structure of it. And we are at that part now where we have been exhorted and exhorted and exhorted to return to God. And now God is telling us this is what happens. This is what's going to happen when you return to God and when we give you the fullness of our salvation. And if we look at it, verses there's a contrast between the wicked and the servants. And in the end, all nations will be invited to join God's covenant family. So salvation is not going to be just for the Jews. Isaiah ends up at the end explaining salvation's not just for the chosen people, all the people will be the chosen people, and that God will bring salvation to Jews, Gentiles, everyone.
Right, the Jews were chosen to take that word out.
Yes.
They don't like that, but.
No.
Right.
Okay. It says, although the unity, the dates, and authorship of the book of Isaiah are disputed among scholars, the content of Isaiah is uncontestable. I mean, it has a specific content, and it covers the three main problems that the Israelites had. The first, the spiritual decline. It was caused by idolatry. So the Israelites declined because they worshiped other gods. It wasn't just the one God. They kept being overthrown and taken over. And so in captivity, they kept on worshiping the gods of the people that had captured them. And so that was their first main challenge. The second was social injustice. Around 810 BC up to 750 BC. Look at our little thing up here. Judah took pleasure in peace and prosperity, both economic and military. They had not known since the time of King Solomon. So during that time, they went back to his peace and prosperity of when they had King Solomon. Nevertheless, these benefits were enjoyed by the upper class. So only the wealthy were there. And it reminded me of when I was traveling in Thailand. And my guide was telling me some disheartening figures. 1% of the people in Thailand own 99% of the wealth in the country. 1% own 99% of the wealth. Therefore, 99% of the people share 1% of the wealth. So there's this incredible wealthy upper class, and then like the only word I can think of is abject poverty. And you see it everywhere. I mean, my guide made a point of trying to take me to the nicer places to see, because going to the places of abject poverty. Now, the new king that had just come into Thailand had studied at Oxford. And he came back with the philosophy, give a man a fish, he eats for a day, teach a man to fish, he eats for a lifetime. And he was setting up state mandated schools in the rural areas to teach the children to read and be participants in their own destiny. But we were still, maybe, the guy said, slowly but surely, we hope to see a change. But that wasn't happening in Jerusalem. It was the higher class was wealthy and had the power. Taxation and exploitation of the trade routes through north and south, through the land bridge of Palestine, caused rapid economic growth, but only again for the wealthy class. The poor, widows, orphans were exploited and abused. Oppression goes right to the heart of Israelite society. So, and this goes totally against the Israel's ideas from the Torah of hospitality being the most important thing. Take care of the widows, take care of the orphans, invite strangers into your house. This was not happening. And then the last one was political turmoil. So we've got spiritual decline, social injustice, political turmoil. And during Isaiah's time, it was a time of great political turmoil for the nation of Judah, with opposition coming from the north and the east, Babylonian, the Assyrians, all of those. Okay. And in the midst of all these challenges, Isaiah is saying, don't stop praying. Pray without ceasing. Do this over and over and over again. And telling them, return, return. God has something he wants to give to you. And one of the scholars made the point, how many of you have ever crossed the street and there was a beggar on the corner, or you've seen a beggar on the corner and you give them something? But not only do you give them something, you tell them, now, when I cross the street again tomorrow, come up to me and ask again. And if I don't give it to you again, chase me down the street and say, but you promised to give me something, and keep following me till I give it again. And that's the picture that this scholar says is being painted in what we're going to look at today, where God is saying, or Isaiah is saying, that what God is saying is, don't stop asking. Keep asking, pound on the doors, pray without ceasing, ask for the glory of Israel to be restored. Do it over and over. Chase me down the halls and ask it over and over. And I just thought that that was an interesting comparison. How many of us actually give something and then ask that person to keep chasing us so that we can give more?
I have a funny, you're reminding me of a funny story.
Oh, good.
Some of y'all will remember Burt Worthington.
Mm-hmm.
He was a church leader years and years ago. And his wife was in poor health and was at Johns Hopkins getting a heart and lung transplant. I mean, it was, so they were up there for a long time. And so he had gone into a 7-Eleven or a 7-Eleven type, that type of store in the morning to get coffee on his way to see his wife, because they had a temporary apartment up there. And a guy comes running in, my tire's flat, I'm late, and, blah, 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 can you, and Bert gave him, $10-20. Next morning, the same thing happened. And Bert looked at him and said, still haven't fixed that tire, huh? And the guy turned around and walked out.
Well, this reminded me, and Jeff has heard me tell the story, and I may have told y'all too. When I was working on my doctorate in Norfolk, I stopped at the Chick-fil-A every morning and got a Diet Dr. Pepper to take to work with me. I drank coffee, but I wanted that to have their little caffeine, keep my mind going. And then I always took an extra one in a can to fill it up. And there were two men there in front of the Chick-fil-A begging every time I went, always begging. And so finally I said, I was down there for 3 years. So after a couple of weeks, I said, would you like for me to buy you breakfast? I didn't want to give them food, but would you like for me to buy you breakfast? Yes. All they wanted was a chicken biscuit each. Good deal. So bought them a chicken biscuit each. The next morning, there they were. Waiting. So for a couple of weeks, I bought them a chicken biscuit each morning. After a while, I asked them would they like to come inside and eat with me. And so I would get my drink and they would each get a chicken biscuit and we talked. And that went on for 3 years until I finally said, I'm graduating and I won't be back. But here's a Chick-fil-A card for each of you. And feel free to get your biscuit for a while for me. They didn't want to come off the street. I'm sure they had some mental issues and all. But for a while, I got to eat breakfast with these two men who all they wanted, they never asked for anything else, never asked for money, just could they have a chicken biscuit each morning. And it reminded me when I was reading this of, I wonder if I hadn't given it to him, if they'd have chased me down the street going, hey.
You tell that story.
Yeah.
So Susan's laughing at me. In fact, I just recalled this story the other day. We were in graduate school at ACU and right down there where that Cannoneer statue used to be. I guess it's not, I don't know if it's there anymore or not, but anyway. These two guys were coming down the street leaning on each other. Rough shape. The guy came up and said, buddy, I'm not gonna lie to you, we need a drink. I said, for God's sake, if you think I'm in bad shape, look at my buddy. So how could you refuse giving him a little, at least he was honest.
That's right. So I appreciate the honesty better. And it just, have any of y'all had an experience where you gave to someone and felt that it was the beginning of opening the door to giving more and more?
Well, I don't know that it opened the door, but I was at a burger place. And there was a guy asking for, I offered him food. I don't remember what he was asking for. I said, I'm willing to buy you some food. And he said, okay. And so I bought him a whole, a meal, burger, fries, and a drink. And I'm surprised he didn't eat the bag. He went after that food like he hadn't eaten in a couple of days, and took it, said thank you, and headed home. And so, but it wasn't a place I frequented regularly, so I don't know. But
And I don't remember the context, but what is the story that Jesus tells about the woman in the temple who bugs some rabbi? Keeps bugging and bugging and bugging her. And he finally says, I'm finally gonna give her what she wants because she's bugging me so much. There's some story like that. and I
Well,
forget
there's
where it
there's a
was.
couple parables that Christ tells about, not giving up on them. There's that story with the judge. Then there's a story about the neighbor knocking on the door and knocking until the guy gets
Yeah,
up.
right.
So Christ also emphasizes and retells this thing of don't stop asking, keep asking. I mean, it's several
And that
parables.
parable you just mentioned, Harold, is the one that's in David's sermon this morning. Knocking on the door at midnight saying, I need a loaf of bread.
We don't have to go to the service.
I know.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna write down a letter that you bring us the sermon each time. I just thought that, this idea of, and of course, how many times have we been told, pray without ceasing? Live a life where you're constantly praying. So, Sarah,
Yes,
do you want to get a Bible
well, I
or,
mean,
oh,
I've
okay.
got Golden Gate, so I can.
Then would you please read Isaiah 62, 1-6?
For the sake of Zion, I will not be silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not be quiet. Until its faithfulness goes out like brightness, its deliverance like a torch that blazes. The nations will see your faithfulness, all the kings your splendor. You will be called by a new name, which Yahweh's mouth will determine. You will be a majestic crown in Yahweh's hand, a royal diadem in your God's palm. You will no longer be termed abandoned. Your country will no longer be termed desolate. Rather, you will be called, my delight is in her, and your country married, because Yahweh delights in you, and your country will be married. Because a youth marries a girl, your sons will marry you. With the grooms rejoicing over a bride, your God will rejoice over you. Upon your walls, Jerusalem, I'm appointing guards. All day and all night, they will never be silent. You who remind Yahweh, there's no stopping for you.
Okay. Does anybody else have a different term for my delight is in you and you will be called married? I'm not sure. It's during verses 4-5.
Yeah, this says, or your land will be called the deserted wife.
Okay.
Oh,
I had, but you shall be called,
in the first part.
yeah, Hephzibah and your
That's
land
what I had.
Beulah.
That's what I have.
Yeah, and
Say-
Hephzibah literally means in Hebrew, my delight is in her, and Beulah means married.
My delight is in her is all capitalized.
Uh-huh,
Each
Yeah.
word is
Yeah.
including is in.
Uh-huh.
Or capitalized, so,
exactly.
and your land and married is
Yeah.
capitalized.
And in quotes with
There's,
Golden Gate.
yeah, it's got a note, footnote saying Beulah.
Yeah.
So that Beulah,
I was just thinking that Beulah land.
Yeah,
Beulah Christian Church, yeah, okay.
Oh,
I know, I thought that was interesting,
Mhm.
like, that you are now the wife of God, you are his betrothed, his loved one. And how many times is Christ compared to the bridegroom and the church is the bride that he's coming to redeem? I just thought that was interesting because here it is in Isaiah.
Mhm.
I want to go back to,
Uh-huh.
I'm hung up on this idea of the person on the street asking for help. And if God is giving instructions to all of humanity, rich, poor, whatever, maybe we're voice hearing those things from, thankfully, we've been fortunate enough to be the person who can give to the one on the street.
It's a male dominant.
But what if that person, what if God's speaking to that person and saying, if you truly have a need and you keep asking, I'll supply something for you. Which is very different from saying, if you get up every morning and just keep taking advantage of people and asking for money, that's a whole different thing. So I think that, if you genuinely have a real need, there probably will be something that will help you. But if you were just out there to take advantage of people, I think God's not speaking to that person.
Well, maybe
that
that
is-
person's there to speak to you. I mean,
Could be.
these people, sometimes we encounter, it's not about you and them, it's between you and God. So,
Right.
well, so it may not be that he's speaking to them to take advantage, but he's using them to speak to us.
What will we be having for breakfast this week?
I'm
I'll
sorry.
be out I'll be out every day at my breakfast.
Well, you've always been welcome in the past, so, you know.
And I
Is it
think,
between you and God?
I think sometimes that God
Right.
has asked us to be his hands and feet and mouth here on earth. And here's a person saying, Lord, I haven't eaten in days. Send me food, help me. And he puts into our hearts to stop. You know, it would have been easy for me to keep driving by those people and think, God, I see for help signs everywhere. Why don't they just get a job? You know, or, you know, let me just give them money and then I don't have to talk to them. But rather, sometimes God puts on our heart to do something for someone that we see.
Right.
And then that we could be the answer. You know, if they're genuinely seeking help, we could be the answer that, but you're right, there are people out there trying to take advantage of people.
Which is why most of my giving goes to the food bank and the,
Mhm.
and organizations who have the ability to discern,
Discern, yeah,
because I don't.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah,
And I actually stopped to talk to David after the sermon today, because we had one verse where we read the Lord's Prayer and, give us this day our daily bread. And then there's this parable of the man who has a visitor show up late at night. And he doesn't have any food to give the visitor, so he runs to his neighbor's door and he's pounding on the door at midnight saying, I need to borrow, you can lend me 3 loaves of bread so I can feed my visitor. And he just keeps persisting, pounding on the door. And eventually, the neighbor gives him the bread just to get him to shut up, basically. But my question to David afterwards, because I was reading a story in the New York Times yesterday, and it had this really haunting picture of these Palestinian children just gaunt, holding out these buckets to try to get food. And they're starving by the hundreds. They're starving to death. And I said, why are we praying, give us this day our daily bread? And why didn't, no matter how many times those children are knocking on the door, they're not getting an answer. They're dying by the hundreds. And he said what his seminary professor had said is that if we have enough daily bread, all of us sitting here, part of it is that we are then obligated as God's children to make sure that those kids in Palestine or in India or in Thailand, wherever, also, we are God's hands and feet. We are obligated to share our daily bread with those people we see.
and I think some of the things that we studied last week where it was talking about other nations will be bringing their riches to you, and yet they're not your slaves. You're living off of the abundance.
Mhm.
The priests or the chosen are living off the abundance of other people. Therefore, you're supposed to be sharing that
Sharing it
abundance,
out, right.
out with other people.
Mhm.
So give us our daily bread. Us is a global
A global. Mhm.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we are part of that prayer when we read that,
Yeah.
it's not that we're helpless, we should be helping those people in Thailand or Palestine or wherever.
And, we give to food banks,
Yeah.
we give to organizations through our church that are providing aid. And when there's a tragedy, I don't know a single person that doesn't try to contribute things, emergency care, like when Katrina, we saw like an outpouring of relief. But it's kind of like, I wouldn't know, I mean, I can't fly to Palestine and hand
No.
out bread, so I count on others who have that resource to be able to do that for me. And therefore I'll gladly gather bread, drive it to you and help you fly there, but
Right. I think the way, I think what David was saying is, no, we can't give those Palestinian children an actual loaf of bread, but what we can do is donate to the organizations
Week
that
of
are,
Compassion.
that are giving
So
that
many
bread.
others, right,
Mhm.
because Week of Compassion does have a present.
Yeah.
This is a story I ran into sometime recently. It's from Hasidic Judaism. Martin Buber tells a story addressing why God created atheists. It's a classic, one of the most famous stories of Hasidic, I guess, or Hasidic.
Hasidic.
Yeah. The rabbi is teaching a student of Talmud and explains that God created everything in this world to be appreciated, since everything is here to teach a lesson. The clever student asks, what lesson can we learn from atheists? Why did God create them? The rabbi responds, God created atheists to teach us the most important lesson of them all, the lesson of true compassion. You see, when an atheist performs an act of charity, visits someone who's sick, helps someone who is in need, and cares for the world, he's not doing so because of some religious teaching. He does not believe that God commanded him to perform this act. In fact, he does not believe in God at all. So his acts are based on inner sense of morality. And look at the kindness he can bestow upon others simply because he feels it to be right. This means, the rabbi continued, that when someone reaches out to you for help, you should never say, I pray that God will help you. Instead, for the moment, you should become an atheist. Imagine that there is no God who can help, and say, I will help you.
It's back.
Today's.
It was your presence, your magic presence.
Yeah, the old TVs, you got up to the TV and then you touched and this.
And you have to stand there while everybody.
Right.
Well, and it's really good.
Well,
It's,
the other thing to remember, I mean, what we're talking about are Judeo-Christian values, not other faiths. So we, of course, want to feed those children, and there are efforts to do so. But you can't get it past groups that are taking it and not giving it to the children, because again, that's not within their faith or their view of the world. So, we can look and feel very, very sorry, but how do we get it through the system that's there to the people that need it, no matter how much we want to give? And again, that's a Judeo-Christian tenet, not particularly other faiths.
It was interesting when I was living in Laos, and I landed in Laos in a field and walked up the dirt road to the airport, where a big fat man was sitting with two Laotian boys fanning him with palm fronds. And I showed him my suitcase to go through customs, and he took from my suitcase what he wanted. And off I went to the village to live for a year.
Hmm.
And I thought about that each time I sent packages to that village. Wonder how much is actually getting through
Mhm.
and what's being taken by customs.
So while greed is universal, good is also universal. And it takes a balance, and it takes sometimes work to find that balance, but anyhow.
well, and I think that hospitality to strangers is not just Christian and Jewish.
No, it is
That
not.
hospitality to strangers is sometimes stronger in some of the Eastern religions than it is in our own religion. I remember my old boss, Mel Schaefer, at VCU, he was in World Health Organization, and he was in the service as a photographer in World War II, and he lived for months with Bedouins out in the desert, doing photography and recording, documenting things and talking about the hospitality that they offered anyone that they met,
Mhm.
you know, in the desert.
Mm.
When
Yeah.
I got to the village, just where I was spending my year, I was the teacher that had been recruited to come. And the first day I was there, they handed me a banana leaf and every single person in the village gave me half of their food.
Wow.
That was my payment. I mean, I had this abundance of
Mm.
food on this banana leaf while they gave me half.
Mm.
Because that's their tradition.
Mm.
Because they didn't have money to pay me, so what they paid me with was one half of their food.
Wow.
And I, you know, it took me a while to explain to them that I did not have to have, I was there because I wanted to be there, and I was there to spend time with them and to get to know them, and they could pay me in other ways, information, sharing, letting me understand their culture, things like that. But it took us a while because they wanted me to have something tangible,
Mhm.
something material
Right.
to know.
And Christ, you know, I was sick, I was a prisoner, you know, I was hungry. And you fed me, you know, and so sometimes, you know, I see someone on the street and it's like, we're not there to judge whether they need it or not, or what they're gonna be doing with it, or what they're doing with their life. We're there to provide or help, you know, in some way.
You use the word judge, and that's what I'm sitting here thinking about is for myself, I feel guilty of judgment. I see that person on the corner and I'm judging. Is this person a drug addict? Is this person gonna stick a gun in my face when I give them $1? Well, you know, I'm judging and I'm guilty of that.
Well, and Harold, I think that you had mentioned once, about giving to people out on the street, and I remember you saying something like, you know, I just gave, I didn't think about how they were going to use it. You know, and that's something I have trouble with every time I drive by and see people sitting on the corner of the street, you know, with holding up signs,
Mhm.
you know,
And Janet Linhart tells a story, back when Tallheimers and Miller Roads were the big, 5-story department stores downtown, right across the street from each other. There was a beggar that sat on I guess on 6th Street,
Mm.
between, the two stores. And she worked in that area and said there were many occasions, either at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, because he apparently treated his begging like a job. She saw him being either dropped off or being picked up by somebody in a Cadillac.
So those things happen, but we all know that other things happen too.
Yeah, but
So,
just,
and it's easy for us to take one situation and
but again,
localize it.
that's,
That's
again, that's why I give it to Feed More rather
Right,
than the
I-
people on the street.
right.
And
So-
when I usually ask people, may I buy you a meal?
Yeah.
Rather than handing them money,
Mhm.
you know, may I buy you a meal?
Mhm.
Is there something that I can do? You know, maybe I am guilty of doing.
I do this,
material.
a similar thing.
Yeah.
I like, it's funny sometimes, excuse me, in our neighborhood food line. Sometimes you'll run into, it's probably been 6 months ago, but I was leaving the food line with my groceries and this car pulls up. And there's this very, very tiny, skinny little old lady in it. And she said, I've been living in my car for a couple of weeks now. And she said, I'm hungry. And I said, stay right there. Right back into the grocery store. You know, I bought her a meal with chicken and potato salad and, regular salad and a dessert and everything. And, and she said, oh, thank you so much. And I think, I'm sure she probably had issues. I don't know what they were, but she was hungry, and that was, I agree with you. I think that's a good way to.
Yeah.
When you have the time, that's a
Right,
good
yeah.
way to do it. I will say, my former brother-in-law worked with, he was a social worker and he worked with mental health patients in New York City for many, 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 many years. Many of them who had addiction problems and just mental health problems in general. And his recommendation was you know, when you give people with addiction issues cash, you're paying for their next fix. And he said, it's not, he said a social worker would tell you not to do that. He said, what, you know, what you should do, and he had little cards printed up that would tell people where to find help through the social service system, where to find the food banks, where to find the social counselors. So that was his take on it. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. I struggle with it. Every time I'm confronted with it, I struggle with it.
And sometimes helping someone isn't necessarily helping someone monetarily or with food. I've told you, I usually go to the grocery store super early in the morning to avoid the crowds.
Yeah.
That's also when all of the older people go to the grocery store, the elderly go. And a lot of times there are not, there's only self-checkout lanes open. And I was at a grocery store and there were these old people standing there and they didn't have any lanes open, and the people were asking, could you please open the lanes? And they were like, you know, use the self-checkout. I don't know how to do that. And they just were kind of standing there looking at them. And I came home and I was gone a long time. And he goes, what did you get? And I said, well, a lot of things, because I had to help 11 old people through the self-checkout lane. Scan their groceries.
I appreciate when you did that.
I mean, just something like that is a kindness to a
Getting
stranger.
something off the top shelf for short people.
Right,
Yeah.
uh-huh. You know, if we look around and realize that in our corner of the world, there are many things we can do to make life a little bit easier for people.
And I've also read a story, and I keep meaning to do this, but I only think about it in situations like this when I can't. I've read a story, and it may have been more than one person, that they keep, say, several gallon-sized Ziploc bags, socks, water, maybe, you know, some nabs or something like that. No money, but, you know, things that would be useful for a homeless person.
Yeah.
And just, you know, if they're stopped on the street, you know, just grab a bag and hand it out the window.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I had a student in my lower level English class. He was by no means not smart, but he had attendance problems and all kinds of other things. And unfortunately, those kids usually end up in the lower level classes. And he had a child whose mother had died in childbirth. So he's taking care of this child. His parents are not allowing him to live at home. So he's working a job, trying to go to school and get his diploma and take care of this child.
And how old is he? Like
He was 17.
17.
Mhm. So he would come to school sometime, half of his hair in corners, the other half out in the fro. Lots of times with baby spit up on his clothes and stuff, you know, just on and on and on. And Jeff and I took him out to dinner a couple of times and did a couple of things. You know, I gave him some things, took diapers and formula, things like that for him. Years later, we were taking Harper swimming at Overhill Lake. And a kid walked up to me and he goes, Mrs. Brannion? And I said, yes. And he goes, hold on. He ran and got this lovely woman and this child, and he comes running back and he goes, honey, this is the teacher who loved me. All those years later. And it was such a simple thing to do, to hand him diapers and formula and be aware that here's a 17-year-old trying to raise a child. And here's this lovely little girl now. And I just thought, oh, thank you, God, for letting me see that the seeds I planted grew into something. You know, because of the parable, we just cast the seeds and hope that some fall on the good soil, some fall on, you know, so I think every time we do something for someone, it enriches us tremendously.
And that's why Jesus told us to do these things, but then he also tells us, do it in secret.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Mhm. He goes on to say that, when he talks about your righteousness goes forth as brightness, or salvation as a light that burns, I will not rest until Jerusalem is restored. He's talking about the original Jerusalem, but he's also talking about the sense of God's kingdom is restored in general. And then, you'll no longer be termed forsaken and desolate. These were the terms that they had known. They had known the experience of war, the experience of defeat, the experience of being in exile. But now you will be known as, I delight in her, and married. Isaiah depicts the loving words that characterize Zion and her intimate union with the Lord. And as the bridegroom rejoices over the bride, we know how much the Lord loves us, or we should. And it's more than an obligation kind of love. He literally rejoices over us. I love when David talks about us being God's beloved children. When Jesus was baptized, and the voice came out and said, "This is my beloved child with whom I am well pleased," that he feels that way about us. These are my beloved children of whom I am well pleased. And it says the same idea is communicated in Zephaniah. The Lord your God in your midst, the mighty one, will save. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will quiet you with his love. He will rejoice over you with singing. It says Isaiah depicts a fabulous picture of redemption, both for Israel and the other nations. Isaiah presents two types, the servants of Zion and the rebellious nations that are punished. So although the people of God live in the darkness right now, God promised future restoration. And these include the returning of the children to Jerusalem, wealth, and the rebuilding of Jerusalem. These promises bring out an ambiguity of the reality. To resolve this ambiguity, Isaiah has placed watchmen on Jerusalem's walls that will never be silent day or night. They will remind the Lord of his promises to Jerusalem. Okay, in Herodotus, which was an early historian, let me see if I can find where he went around behind, remember the Athenians, master, remember the Athenians. Herodotus, the Persian king Darius had a servant whose task was to keep repeating to him after the disastrous defeat at Marathon, master, remember the Athenians. We might say that the remembrancer is following the example of Abraham and Moses as a prophetic figure. Julius Caesar had a man who followed along behind him saying, "Remember, you're just a man. Remember, you're just a man." Constantly whispering it in his ear as people urged him to become king, emperor, the Holy of Holies, the head of the Holy Roman Empire. And you're just a man, you're just a man, you're just a man. That's what, that God is putting on the walls, watchmen, whose job is to do nothing but beseech God to bring his kingdom. To bring his kingdom. We say in the Lord's Prayer, "Thy kingdom come." Like we are asking, we want your kingdom to come. And we talked before about how in the after Jesus left, they all thought the kingdom was coming soon. They had no idea we were gonna
So
have to
we-
wait so long for it. So they were constantly ready for the kingdom to come and prayed, let your kingdom come. If we look at verse Isaiah 62, verse 1, Sarah, can you read? I mean,
She's
Sally,
Susan.
Susan, can you read verse 1?
Sally, Susan,
Sally,
Sarah.
Susan, whoever, verse 1 of 62.
For Zion's sake, I will not keep silent. For Jerusalem's sake, I will not remain quiet. Till her vindication shines out like the dawn, her salvation like a blazing torch.
Okay, then Jeff, will you read 6? Go ahead.
Upon your walls, O Jerusalem, I have posted sentinels all day and all night. They shall never be silent. You who remind the Lord, take no rest, and give no rest until he establishes Jerusalem and makes it renowned throughout the earth.
Okay, these are almost like carbon copies. Verse 1, I will not keep silent. I have appointed watchmen all day and all night who will not keep silent. So they're saying we should not keep silent. We should constantly be talking to the Lord and beseeching him and asking for his kingdom to come. Lord, Maranatha, you know, the word for your kingdom come. Come now, Lord Jesus, come now. And then let's see. It says, Isaiah explains more of the purpose and time of the watchers. They will not give a rest. They will offer their prayer continually until two things happen. Firstly, their intercessory prayer will not give rest to Yahweh until he fulfills his promises regarding Zion in chapter 60. Secondly, the time of the watchman's ministry will not stop until Jerusalem has been divinely transformed into the city that evokes praise from the whole earth for what Yahweh has done. In short, not only there will be no cessation to the ones who pray fervently, but also they are not to give cessation to God until he has made Jerusalem a praise of the earth. It says, do not be silent. Do not let him be silent until he prepares and makes Jerusalem to sing on the earth. In summary, Isaiah 62 urges the people of God to pray fervently and not to allow God rest, but awaken him with relentless cries so that God would keep his promises to the end. So we are to never stop beseeching God to bring his kingdom. Bring your kingdom, which will bring salvation, peace, justice. I thought I was going to get through 2 chapters, but I only made 1.
Duly
Okay.
noted.
So there's 4 more to go and 2 more Sundays.
Okay.